Hi, I'm Sergeant First Class Amanda Rodriguez. When my father stood up at my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner and announced to our extended family that the military had ruined his sweet little girl and turned her into a cold, angry soldier, I felt 15 years of service being dismissed by the man who should have been proud of me. What he didn't know was that my transformation had earned me a Bronze Star for saving 12 soldiers under enemy fire in Afghanistan, including the brother whose wedding he was celebrating. When my former sergeant major walked into that dinner as my brother's surprise best man and immediately saluted me with tears in his eyes, announcing, "Ladies and gentlemen, you're in the presence of one of the finest soldiers I've ever served with," my father's narrative about military service ruining his daughter finally faced the truth about what it had actually created.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
Growing up in the Rodriguez household in Albuquerque meant understanding your place in a very specific family dynamic. My father, Carlos Rodriguez, owned a successful auto repair shop and had clear expectations for his children. My younger brother, Miguel, was the golden child, charming, outgoing, and destined to take over the family business. I was supposed to be his sweet, supportive older sister who would marry young, stay close to home, and help with the grandchildren he was sure Miguel would provide. The military had never been part of Dad's plan for me. When I enlisted in the Army at 18, straight out of high school, he treated it like a temporary rebellion rather than a serious career choice. "Amanda's just trying to find herself," he would tell relatives who asked about my absence during family gatherings. "She'll come home when she realizes what she's missing." But the Army had given me something I'd never found in my father's house, a sense of purpose and belonging that didn't depend on making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's expectations. Basic training had been brutal, but it had also been transformative. For the first time in my life, my determination and resilience were valued rather than dismissed as stubbornness. 15 years of service had taken me from private to sergeant first class, with deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kosovo. I'd earned my college degree through military education benefits, advanced through leadership schools, and developed skills in logistics and personnel management that transferred far beyond military applications. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment and stand up for what I believed was right. Miguel, meanwhile, had followed Dad's blueprint perfectly. After high school, he'd worked at the shop while attending community college part-time, eventually earning a business degree and taking over daily operations. He was engaged to Sofia Morales, a sweet elementary school teacher who shared Dad's vision of traditional family roles and responsibilities. Their wedding was scheduled for next weekend at St. Francis Cathedral, with a reception at the historic La Fonda Hotel. It would be the social event of our extended family's year, with over 200 guests celebrating Miguel's transition into married life and his role as the next generation of Rodriguez family leadership. The problem was that every time I came home for family visits, Dad became increasingly critical of the changes he saw in me. My military bearing, which had earned respect from commanding officers and fellow soldiers, was interpreted as coldness by a father who remembered a quiet, compliant teenage daughter. My confidence in expressing opinions was viewed as argumentative behavior that undermined family harmony. "The Army has changed you, Amanda," he would say during family dinners, his disapproval obvious to everyone at the table. "You used to be such a sweet girl, always helpful and agreeable. Now you act like you know better than everyone else." What Dad saw as negative changes, I experienced as growth and self-discovery. The military had taught me to speak up when I saw problems, to take initiative when leadership was needed, and to maintain composure under pressure. These weren't character flaws. They were professional competencies that had served me well in challenging situations. But explaining this to a father who viewed any deviation from his expectations as personal rejection was impossible. Dad wanted the daughter he remembered, not the soldier I had become. And as Miguel's wedding approached, the tension between us was reaching a breaking point that would force our family to confront the reality of who I had become versus who Dad insisted I should have remained.
The rehearsal dinner at Miguel's future in-laws' house should have been a celebration of family unity. Instead, it became the stage for my father's most public criticism of my military service and the person I had become. The Morales family had graciously opened their beautiful adobe home for the evening, with extended family members from both sides gathered on the patio under string lights and paper lanterns. I had arrived in a simple navy dress, nothing flashy or attention-seeking, just hoping to blend in and support my brother's happiness. But Dad had been drinking wine throughout the evening, and his usual filter for family diplomacy was completely gone by the time Sophia's father asked him to say a few words about Miguel. "My son Miguel is everything a father could ask for," Dad began, raising his wine glass toward the assembled guests. "He's stayed close to family, built a successful business, and chosen a wonderful woman who understands the importance of tradition and loyalty." The speech should have ended there, but Dad's eyes found me sitting at a corner table, and his expression shifted to something I recognized from years of family dinners: disappointment mixed with resentment. "I also have a daughter, Amanda, who's here tonight," he continued, his voice taking on the tone he used when discussing family problems he couldn't solve. "The Army she joined 15 years ago, and I have to say, it's changed her completely. The sweet, helpful girl I raised is gone." The patio went silent as over 50 family members and friends processed my father's words. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as Dad continued his public assessment of my character flaws. "The military has made her hard, argumentative, and frankly, angry all the time. She comes home from deployments acting like she knows better than everyone else, questioning decisions that have worked for our family for generations. It's sad to see what happens when children abandon the values they were raised with." Sophia's grandmother, seated near me, reached over and squeezed my hand sympathetically. She had clearly not expected to witness such family drama at her granddaughter's rehearsal dinner. "I just hope," Dad concluded, raising his glass again, "that Miguel and Sophia will remember the importance of staying true to who they are, instead of letting outside influences change them into people their family doesn't recognize anymore." The toast that followed was awkward and half-hearted, with most guests unsure how to respond to my father's public criticism of his own daughter. I sat in mortified silence, processing the fact that my military service, something I was proud of, was being described as a character failing that had corrupted me beyond recognition. Miguel looked uncomfortable but didn't defend me. Sophia's family exchanged confused glances, clearly unsure how to navigate the family tension that had just exploded at their celebration. The evening continued with forced conversation and strained smiles, but Dad's words hung over the gathering like a dark cloud. After 15 years of dedicated service, multiple deployments, and genuine personal growth, my own father had used my brother's rehearsal dinner to publicly declare that the military had ruined me as a person. The betrayal cut deeper than any criticism he had ever made in private, because now our entire extended family had heard his assessment of my worth and character. As I sat there watching relatives avoid eye contact with me, I realized that Dad's problem wasn't with specific behaviors or personality changes. His problem was that I had become someone he couldn't control, someone who had found identity and purpose outside his approval, and that independence threatened his vision of what his daughter should be. The sweet, compliant girl he missed had been replaced by a confident woman who had earned respect through service and sacrifice. But in Dad's eyes, that transformation was a tragedy rather than an achievement, and he had just made sure everyone at Miguel's celebration knew exactly how he felt about the soldier his daughter had become. The fallout from Dad's rehearsal dinner speech spread through our extended family like wildfire. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing with text messages from cousins, aunts, and family friends who had witnessed my public humiliation. Some were supportive, expressing shock at Dad's behavior. Others seemed to agree with his assessment that I had become too hard since joining the Army. My cousin Maria texted, "Amanda, I can't believe Uncle Carlos said those things about you in front of everyone. You've served our country." But my Aunt Rosa's message was less encouraging. "Maybe your father has a point, mija. You do seem more intense."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The most painful response came from Miguel himself. When I called him that morning, his reaction was disappointment, not with Dad's public criticism, but with my failure to just let it go for family harmony. "Amanda, why are you making this about you?" he asked with exasperation. "Dad had too much wine and said some things he probably didn't mean. It's my wedding weekend. Can't you just ignore it?" "Miguel, he told 50 people that the military ruined me as a person. How is that something I should ignore?" "Because family comes first," Miguel replied with certainty. "Dad's old-fashioned and he misses the way you used to be. That doesn't make him wrong about everything." The conversation hurt more than Dad's original speech. My brother was telling me that maintaining family peace was more important than defending my dignity or acknowledging 15 years of honorable service. The wedding became an exercise in forced smiles and strained interactions. Extended family members either avoided me entirely or approached with carefully neutral conversation that steered clear of my military career. During the reception, Dad's behavior escalated. He began making additional remarks to wedding guests about how the Army changes people and how some children forget where they come from. When Sophia's grandfather, a World War II veteran, tried to engage me in conversation about my deployments, Dad interrupted to explain that Amanda takes her military experience too seriously and that she's lost perspective on what really matters. The elderly veteran looked confused and offended. "Sir," he said carefully, "your daughter has served multiple deployments in combat zones. That deserves respect, not criticism." But Dad was too invested in his narrative. "You don't live with her. You don't see how the military has made her argumentative and stubborn. She used to be such a sweet girl." By the end of the reception, Dad's public campaign against my character had created a family split. Some relatives supported his view that military service had changed me for the worse, while others questioned his judgment. The most devastating realization was that Miguel had chosen to support Dad's narrative rather than defend my sister's honor. The brother I had thought about during deployments, whose safety I literally risked my life to protect, was more concerned about wedding drama than standing up for my service. As I prepared to leave early, I realized Dad's criticism had revealed something important. This wasn't about personality changes or military influence. It was about a father who couldn't accept that his daughter had found identity and purpose outside his control, and a family system that prioritized his comfort over my dignity. That night after Miguel's reception, I sat alone in my hotel room, still wearing my bridesmaid dress, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the cold, angry soldier my father had described to 50 wedding guests. She was someone who had served her country with honor, earned the respect of her peers, and developed leadership skills through years of dedicated service. For the first time in 15 years of military service, I began to question whether coming home for family events was worth the emotional toll. Dad's public criticism wasn't just hurtful. It was fundamentally wrong about who I had become and what my service meant. The military hadn't made me cold. It had taught me to remain calm under pressure. It hadn't made me angry. It had given me the confidence to speak up when I saw injustice. It hadn't made me argumentative. It had developed my ability to think critically and express my opinions clearly. These weren't character flaws. They were strengths that had earned me promotions, the respect of my soldiers, and recognition from commanding officers. I thought about the Bronze Star in my apartment back at Fort Campbell, awarded for actions during my 3rd deployment to Afghanistan. While Dad was telling wedding guests that the military had ruined his sweet daughter, he had no idea that his ruined daughter had risked her life to save 12 soldiers, including Miguel, who had deployed with my unit as a combat medic. The irony was devastating. Dad was celebrating Miguel's wedding while criticizing the very qualities in me that had literally kept his son alive during that firefight outside Kandahar. The coldness he resented was the emotional control that allowed me to coordinate a medical evacuation under enemy fire. The argumentative nature he criticized was the decisive leadership that convinced our commanding officer to approve a dangerous rescue mission. Miguel had never told our family the details of that deployment, respecting operational security protocols, but he knew exactly what had happened. He had been there when I made the call to go back for wounded soldiers despite orders to hold position. He had seen me organize the evacuation that saved his life and 11 others. Yet, at his own wedding, he had chosen to support Dad's narrative rather than defend the sister who had literally taken enemy fire to protect him. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through pictures from that deployment. Images I couldn't share with family due to security restrictions, but that told the real story of my military service. Photos with my squad after successful missions, commendations from grateful unit commanders, letters from soldiers' families thanking me for bringing their sons and daughters home safely. This wasn't the record of someone who had been ruined by military service. This was the record of someone who had found her calling in protecting and leading others, who had developed skills and character traits that served both her country and the people around her. The awakening wasn't just about recognizing Dad's unfairness. It was about understanding that I had been allowing his disapproval to make me doubt myself and my choices. I had spent years trying to be the sweet, compliant daughter he wanted when I came home, downplaying my achievements and apologizing for qualities that were actually strengths. But I was done apologizing for becoming someone worthy of respect. I was done accepting criticism from people who had never served, never led troops under fire, never had to make life or death decisions while maintaining the emotional control necessary to keep everyone else calm. Dad could continue believing that military service had ruined his daughter, but I knew the truth. The Army had given me purpose, confidence, and the skills to lead and protect others. If that transformation disappointed him, the problem wasn't with my service. It was with his inability to recognize strength when it didn't conform to his outdated expectations of who his daughter should be. Tomorrow, I would return to Fort Campbell and continue serving with pride, regardless of whether my family understood or appreciated what that service meant. For the first time in 15 years, their approval felt less important than my own self-respect.
Back at Fort Campbell, I threw myself into my duties with renewed focus. The clarity I'd found in that hotel room had crystallized into determination. I was done allowing my family's misconceptions to diminish my sense of accomplishment and self-worth. More importantly, I realized Miguel deserved to know the truth about what had happened during our deployment together. My first call was to Staff Sergeant Johnson, who had been my squad leader during that Afghanistan deployment. "Johnson, I need a favor. My family doesn't understand my military service, and I think it's time they heard some specifics about what we accomplished over there." "Sergeant Rodriguez," he replied immediately, "after what you did for our unit in Kandahar, I'd do anything for you. What do you need?" I explained the situation with my father's public criticism and Miguel's failure to defend my service. Johnson's response was immediate and heated. "Your brother was there when you saved those 12 soldiers. He knows exactly what kind of leader you are." The breakthrough came when Johnson called back with unexpected news. "Rodriguez, you're not going to believe this. Remember Sergeant Major Martinez from our deployment? He's working as a civilian contractor now, and he's the best man for your brother's friend's wedding next month." Sergeant Major Martinez had been our unit's senior enlisted leader during that Afghanistan deployment. He had personally recommended me for the Bronze Star after witnessing my actions during the Kandahar firefight. More importantly, he had served with both Miguel and me, giving him unique insight into our family dynamic.
Sergeant Major Martinez knows exactly what happened during that firefight, Johnson continued. He wrote the citation for your Bronze Star. If anyone can set the record straight with your family, it's him. The call to Martinez was easier than expected. Rodriguez, he said warmly, I heard about what happened at your brother's wedding. Miguel told me about your father's comments, and I have to say, I'm disappointed in both of them. What do you mean, Sergeant Major? I mean, your brother knows exactly what kind of soldier you are. He was there when you risked your life to save our wounded. For him to let your father criticize your service without defending you, that's not the Miguel I remember from Afghanistan. Martinez agreed to attend Miguel's friend's wedding, not to cause drama, but to provide perspective that our family clearly needed. Rodriguez, your service record speaks for itself. You're one of the finest NCOs I've worked with in 30 years. As I prepared for what would likely be another uncomfortable family gathering, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: confidence. Not because I was looking for confrontation, but because I finally had allies who understood the truth about my military service and were willing to share that truth with people who had believed falsehoods about my character. The time for accepting undeserved criticism was over. My family was about to learn what my fellow soldiers had known for years, that the woman they saw as ruined by military service was actually someone who had found her calling in protecting others under the most challenging circumstances imaginable.
The wedding reception for Miguel's friend took place at a country club in Santa Fe, and I arrived with mixed emotions about facing family members again after the drama from Miguel's wedding. Dad was there, of course, along with several relatives who had witnessed his public criticism of my military service. The atmosphere was polite, but strained when they saw me. I was standing near the bar when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, I'll be damned, is that Sergeant First Class Rodriguez? I turned around to see Sergeant Major Martinez approaching with a huge grin on his weathered face. He was wearing a sharp civilian suit, but his military bearing was unmistakable. Before I could respond, he had pulled me into a bear hug that lifted me off my feet. Sergeant Major Martinez! Miguel said you were the best man, but I didn't expect to see you here. Wouldn't miss it. Plus, I heard through the grapevine that someone's been talking nonsense about one of my finest soldiers. His expression grew serious as he looked around the reception. Where's your father? I think it's time we had a conversation. Dad had been watching our interaction from across the room with obvious confusion. He approached hesitantly, clearly unsure how to navigate a conversation with someone who obviously knew me from my military service. Mr. Rodriguez, Sergeant Major Martinez said, extending his hand with military precision, I'm Sergeant Major Martinez. I had the honor of serving with both your children during their deployment to Afghanistan. Dad shook his hand warily. Nice to meet you. I hope Amanda behaved herself over there. Martinez's expression shifted from friendly to stone-cold serious. Sir, with respect, your daughter didn't just behave herself. She saved 12 soldiers' lives during a firefight outside Kandahar, including your son Miguel's life. The color drained from Dad's face. What do you mean? I mean, Sergeant Rodriguez risked her life to coordinate a medical evacuation under enemy fire when Miguel's unit was pinned down. She ignored direct orders to hold position because she knew those soldiers would die without immediate extraction. Your son was one of the wounded she carried to safety. Miguel, who had been standing nearby talking to other guests, suddenly appeared at his father's side. His face had gone pale as Martinez continued speaking. The woman you described as cold and angry at your son's wedding, Martinez continued, his voice rising slightly, is one of the finest NCOs I've served with in 30 years. Her leadership under fire saved lives and earned the respect of every soldier in our unit. Miguel stood frozen beside Dad, unable to meet my eyes. The brother who had let our father publicly criticize my service without defending me was now being forced to confront his own silence about events he had witnessed firsthand. Sir, Martinez concluded, looking directly at Dad, if the Army changed your daughter, it was to make her into someone capable of extraordinary courage and leadership. You should be proud of the soldier she became, not critical of the woman she's always been. The confrontation was complete.
My father's narrative about military service ruining my sweet daughter had been systematically dismantled by someone whose authority and expertise he couldn't question. More importantly, Miguel's failure to defend my service had been exposed as willful silence about heroism he had personally witnessed. For the first time in 15 years of military service, my family was hearing the truth about what I had accomplished and who I had become through my service to our country.
The silence that followed Sergeant Major Martinez's revelation was deafening. Dad stood frozen, processing the fact that his ruined daughter had literally saved his son's life during combat operations. The relatives who had witnessed his public criticism at Miguel's wedding were now staring at me with expressions of shock and newfound respect. Miguel finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Amanda, I should have told them. I should have defended you at my wedding." "Yes, you should have," Martinez said with the blunt honesty of a senior NCO. "Your sister risked her life for you and 11 other soldiers, and you let your father publicly criticize her character without saying a word? That's not the Miguel Rodriguez I remember from Afghanistan." Dad's transformation was immediate and complete. The man who had spent months criticizing my military service now looked at me with something approaching awe. "Amanda, why didn't you ever tell us about this, about saving Miguel's life?" "Because operational security means we don't discuss mission details with civilians. And because every time I tried to share pride in my service, you treated it as evidence that the military had made me arrogant." Martinez stepped closer to Dad, his voice carrying 30 years of military authority. "Sir, your daughter is exactly the kind of soldier our country needs. The discipline you call coldness is what kept her calm under enemy fire. The confidence you call argumentative is what gave her the courage to ignore orders when she knew soldiers would die." The crowd around us had grown to include most of the wedding reception. Sophia's grandfather, the World War II veteran who had tried to defend me at Miguel's wedding, approached with tears in his eyes. "Young lady," he said, taking my hands in his weathered ones, "I tried to tell your father at the last wedding that your service deserved respect. Now I understand why. You're a genuine hero." Dad looked around at the assembled family members, many of whom were now viewing him with obvious disapproval for his previous treatment of me. His usual confidence was completely gone, replaced by shame and the uncomfortable realization that he had been publicly criticizing someone whose service record far exceeded anything he had ever accomplished. "Amanda," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. Not just for the things I said at Miguel's wedding, but for 15 years of not understanding what your service meant." Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's a start, sir. But your daughter doesn't need your approval to validate her service record. She's earned the respect of everyone she's served with through genuine leadership and sacrifice." Miguel approached me hesitantly, clearly struggling with his own guilt. "Sister, I was there. I saw what you did for our unit. I have no excuse for letting Dad criticize you without defending you." For the first time in our adult relationship, Miguel was speaking to me with genuine respect, rather than the tolerant dismissal that had characterized his attitude toward my military career. The brother who had treated my service as a phase I would eventually outgrow was finally recognizing that I had become someone worthy of his admiration, rather than his patience. The victory wasn't just about Dad's changed perspective, or Miguel's belated recognition of my service. It was about the validation from someone whose opinion actually mattered, a career soldier who understood what military leadership meant and wasn't afraid to defend it publicly. Martinez had done more than correct my family's misconceptions. He had demonstrated to everyone present that the woman they saw as changed for the worse was actually someone who had found her calling in protecting others, someone whose transformation through military service represented growth rather than loss. As the reception continued around us, family members approached me throughout the evening with apologies and expressions of pride they had never offered before. But the most important change was in how I felt about myself, finally recognized by my own family for the person I had actually become, rather than criticized for failing to remain the person Dad had wanted me to stay.
3 days after the reception confrontation, Martinez called me with information that would complete my family's understanding of my military service. Rodriguez, I've been thinking about what happened at that wedding, and I realized your family doesn't know the full scope of your accomplishments. Mind if I share some details that might give them better perspective? What kind of details, Sergeant Major? Well, for instance, they don't know that you were recommended for promotion to Sergeant First Class ahead of schedule based on your leadership during that deployment, or that your Bronze Star citation was upgraded from a lower decoration because the investigating officer determined your actions went beyond the call of duty. The deeper revelations continued when Martinez explained that my service record included commendations I had never shared with family due to operational security. Your tactical innovations during that firefight are now taught at the NCO Academy as a case study in battlefield leadership. You didn't just save those 12 soldiers, you developed evacuation procedures that have been used to save hundreds more. When I shared this with Miguel during our first honest conversation since his wedding, his response was immediate and emotional. Amanda, I had no idea your actions became part of military training. I knew what you did for us that day, but I never understood the broader impact. The most significant revelation came when Martinez contacted our local veterans organization in Albuquerque. Rodriguez, I spoke with the VFW commander about your father's comments. Turns out several Afghanistan veterans in your hometown have been following your career. They want to organize a recognition ceremony. Dad called me that evening after Martinez had shared additional details about my service record. His voice was thick with emotion and shame. Amanda, Sergeant Martinez told me that your Bronze Star was originally going to be a Silver Star, but it was downgraded due to classification issues. Is that true? Dad, the specific details of awards and citations aren't something I discuss. What matters is that I served honorably and did my job. But it's not just doing your job, is it? Martinez said you've influenced military doctrine and that officers study your decisions at West Point. My daughter's leadership is being taught to future Army officers. The hometown veterans ceremony took place 2 weeks later at the American Legion Hall with over 100 veterans and community members in attendance. Martinez flew in from Colorado to present me with a certificate of appreciation from our former unit, and Dad insisted on introducing me to the assembled crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Dad said, his voice carrying pride instead of the criticism I had grown accustomed to, my daughter, Sergeant First Class Amanda Rodriguez, has served our country with distinction for 15 years. She saved the lives of 12 soldiers, including my son, and her leadership has influenced how our military trains future leaders. The transformation from "the military ruined my sweet daughter" to publicly celebrating my achievements was complete. But more importantly, Martinez had helped my family understand that my service record extended far beyond a single act of heroism. Your father needed to understand, Martinez told me after the ceremony, that the woman he saw as changed for the worst had actually become someone whose contributions to military excellence were recognized at the highest levels. You're not just a good soldier, Rodriguez, you're someone whose service has made the entire Army better. The recognition ceremony marked not just acknowledgement of my service, but my family's acceptance that military transformation represented growth rather than loss. Dad's criticism had been replaced by genuine pride, and Miguel's silence about my heroism had evolved into active advocacy for my accomplishments. Most importantly, I no longer needed their approval to validate my service record. The respect of fellow veterans and the knowledge that my military contributions had influenced others was worth more than years of seeking family recognition that had been withheld due to misunderstanding rather than merit.
6 months after the veterans ceremony, our family dynamics had transformed completely. Dad, who had once publicly criticized my military service, now volunteered at the local VA hospital and frequently spoke about his daughter's heroism to anyone who would listen. The man who had claimed the Army ruined his sweet daughter was now one of my strongest advocates in our community. I spent 15 years not understanding what Amanda had accomplished, he told a local newspaper reporter writing about military families. I let my own ignorance about military service blind me to the fact that my daughter had become exactly the kind of person our country needs, someone willing to risk everything to protect others. Miguel's transformation was equally profound. He had enrolled in veteran advocacy classes and was working to establish a support group for military families in Albuquerque. His guilt over failing to defend my service had motivated him to become an active voice for veteran recognition in our community. "My sister saved my life in Afghanistan," he told the support group during one of their first meetings, "but I was too ashamed of my own actions during that firefight to tell my family what she had done for me. I let my father criticize her character for years rather than admit that I owed my life to her courage." The most unexpected change came in my relationship with Sophia, Miguel's wife. She had started volunteering with military spouse support groups, helping other women understand the challenges of supporting family members who served in combat roles. Amanda helped me realize that military service changes people for the better, not for the worse. The strength and discipline that civilian families sometimes find intimidating are exactly the qualities that keep our soldiers alive in dangerous situations. The local veterans organization had adopted my story as part of their outreach program, using my family's journey as an example of how civilian misconceptions about military service could be overcome through education and honest conversation. Martinez, who had become something of a mentor to both Miguel and Dad, visited our family regularly when his contractor work brought him through Albuquerque. "Rodriguez," he told me during one of these visits, "your family's transformation gives me hope for other military families dealing with similar misunderstandings." The final resolution came during a barbecue at Dad's house, where our extended family gathered for the first time since Miguel's wedding. The relatives who had witnessed Dad's public criticism of my service now approached me with genuine respect and curiosity about my military career. "Amanda," my Aunt Rosa, pulling me aside during the gathering, "I owe you an apology. I supported your father's comments about the military changing you, without understanding what that change actually represented. You've become someone extraordinary, and I should have recognized that years ago." Dad's speech at the barbecue was brief but powerful. "I want everyone here to know that my daughter Amanda is a Bronze Star recipient who saved 12 soldiers' lives in Afghanistan. For too many years, I failed to understand that the qualities I criticized, her discipline, her confidence, her leadership, were exactly what made her an exceptional soldier and an exceptional person." The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, a stark contrast to the uncomfortable silence that had met his criticism at Miguel's wedding. Our family had finally learned to celebrate military service rather than resent its transformative effects. As the evening wound down, Miguel approached me with a small wrapped box. Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with the coordinates of our firebase in Afghanistan and the date of the firefight where I had earned my Bronze Star. "I should have given this to you years ago," he said quietly. "It's a reminder that your service didn't change you for the worse. It revealed who you had always been capable of becoming." The journey from criticism to celebration had taken 15 years, but our family had finally reached a place where military service was understood as a source of pride rather than concern. Dad's transformation from harsh critic to proud advocate proved that even the deepest misconceptions about military service could be overcome through honesty, education, and the willingness to admit when you've been fundamentally wrong about someone you love.
3 years have passed since Sergeant Major Martinez walked into that wedding reception and changed everything for my family. I'm writing this from my new assignment at Fort Benning, where I now serve as a senior instructor at the NCO Academy, teaching the very leadership principles that Martinez said had influenced military doctrine. Dad has become one of the most vocal military advocates in Albuquerque. He volunteers at the VA hospital every Tuesday, speaks at high school career days about military service, and has organized 3 fundraising events for veteran support organizations. The man who once claimed the Army had ruined his daughter now tells anyone who will listen that military service creates exactly the kind of leaders our country needs. "I spent 15 years criticizing my daughter for qualities that made her extraordinary," he told a group of potential military recruits last month. Her discipline, her confidence, her ability to make tough decisions under pressure, these weren't character flaws. They were the exact traits that saved 12 soldiers' lives in Afghanistan. Miguel has channeled his guilt into positive action, establishing a nonprofit organization that helps military families navigate the challenges of reintegration after deployments. His own experience with keeping silent about combat operations has made him an effective advocate for better communication between service members and their families. My sister risked her life to save mine, and I was too ashamed of my own actions during that firefight to defend her when my father criticized her service, he explains to the families he counsels. Military service changes people, but those changes usually represent growth and strength, not damage or loss. The most meaningful change has been in my relationship with my extended family. Relatives who once viewed my military bearing as coldness now seek my advice on everything from career decisions to conflict resolution. They've learned to appreciate the leadership skills that Dad had once criticized as argumentative behavior. My cousin Maria, who had initially supported Dad's criticism, now works as a civilian contractor on military bases. Watching Amanda's transformation from criticized daughter to respected instructor taught our whole family about recognizing strength in different forms, she says. The teaching position at Fort Benning has been incredibly fulfilling. Every week, I work with NCOs who are developing the same leadership skills that saved those 12 soldiers in Afghanistan. The case study that Martinez mentioned, my decisions during that firefight, is now part of the curriculum I teach to future military leaders. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, one of my students, said after a particularly intense leadership scenario, "How do you stay calm when everything is going wrong and people are counting on you to make life or death decisions?" The answer comes from 15 years of learning that military service doesn't change you for the worse. It reveals who you're capable of becoming when others need you to be strong, decisive, and willing to risk everything for the right reasons. Martinez visits Fort Benning regularly in his role as a civilian contractor, and we often discuss how family misconceptions about military service can be overcome through education and honest conversation. Rodriguez, he told me during his last visit, "Your family's journey from criticism to pride gives hope to other military families dealing with similar challenges. The lesson that emerged from my family's transformation is that respect sometimes requires education. People who have never served don't always understand that military discipline, confidence, and leadership represent positive character development rather than negative personality changes. Most importantly, I've learned that seeking approval from people who don't understand your service is less important than knowing that your contributions mattered to the people who do understand. The bronze star on my uniform doesn't need my father's validation, but having his support and pride makes family gatherings much more enjoyable." Looking back, I realized that Dad's criticism wasn't really about military service changing me for the worse. It was about his fear that I had outgrown his ability to understand and relate to the person I had become. Once he learned what my transformation actually represented, his fear turned to pride, and our family finally found a way to celebrate military service instead of resenting its effects. The sweet, compliant daughter he had missed was gone forever, replaced by someone capable of extraordinary leadership and sacrifice. But that replacement had turned out to be exactly what our family needed. Someone strong enough to demand respect and patient enough to help others understand why that respect was deserved. Now when I go home to Albuquerque, I'm welcomed not as the daughter who disappointed Dad's expectations, but as the soldier who exceeded everyone's understanding of what was possible. The military didn't change me for the worse. It gave me the tools to become someone worthy of the pride my family finally learned to feel.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.